His eyes snapped open, the phantom melody still echoing in his skull. The nebula spun behind his eyelids, violet and gold, a hypnotic spiral that felt less like a dream and more like a broadcast. Aris Thorne lay rigid in his bunk, the hum of the Odysseus a familiar comfort he could no longer feel. The star-charted ceiling glowed softly above him, a map of everything humanity knew, and yet his mind was filled with something entirely other. A cold dread settled in his chest. This was the seventh night, each vision clearer, each note of that impossible song more precise. They weren't dreams. They were memories, and they weren't his. The transmission was stitching itself into his consciousness, a silent, growing pull toward a point in the blackness he'd never plotted on any chart. Something was calling, and it was no longer asking. He pushed himself up from the bunk, the thin synth wool blanket falling away. The cold dread was a physical weight now, a leaden certainty in his gut. He had to know. The command deck was dark, lit only by the soft, pulsing glow of navigation beacons and the steady stream of data flowing across the main console. "Chimera," Aris said, his voice rough with sleep and something else apprehension. "Access my neural logs from the last 72 hours. Isolate all REM and theta wave activity. I want a full spectral analysis." A calm, synthesized voice emanated from the console, its tone devoid of judgment. "Processing, Dr. Thorne." A holographic display flickered to life above the console, a complex web of colorful lines representing the electrical storm of his own sleeping mind. For a long moment, he just stared, seeing the familiar patterns of dream sleep, the spikes of memory consolidation. And then he saw it. A series of sharp, rhythmic pulses embedded deep within the theta waves, a pattern so consistent and mathematically precise it stood out against the organic chaos of his normal brain activity like a perfect diamond in rough stone. "Magnify that anomaly," he whispered, leaning closer. "Filter everything else out." The display shifted, isolating the signal. It was a clean, repeating sequence, a cadence that felt unnervingly familiar. It was the rhythm of the melody from his dream. "Run a comparative analysis," he instructed, a theory forming, one so outlandish he was almost afraid to give it voice. "Cross-reference this pattern with all known deep space phenomena within a 20 light-year radius. Look for a match in frequency and modulation." "One moment," Chimera replied. New data windows bloomed across the holo display, star charts, pulsar readings, the microwave whisper of distant nebulae. Most were dismissed in milliseconds. Then one window locked, highlighting a region of space officially designated as void, an empty expanse between spiral arms. A match has been identified with a 99.97% congruence. The source is a low-frequency, rhythmic emission originating from a gravitationally bound cluster of brown dwarfs. The cluster is unregistered and holds the provisional designation K73X. Aris felt the air leave his lungs. He knew that designation, the silent chorus. It was an astronomer's joke, a placeholder name for a celestial oddity nobody had ever bothered to study in depth. A place where stars had failed to ignite, singing a song nobody could hear. "Until now, the patterns are not random, Doctor," Chimera stated, its synthetic voice cutting through his rising panic. The AI overlaid the two signals, the one from his mind and the one from the chorus. They were identical, pulse for pulse, note for note, a perfect mirror. They are a language, a highly complex, non-verbal syntax built on mathematical constants and quantum resonance. Aris stared, his professional skepticism crumbling. This was no psychological episode, no stress-induced hallucination, a language and the content. He asked, almost afraid of the answer, "What is it saying?" "The primary content appears to be a coordinate," Chimera replied. A set of numbers flashed on the screen, a location pin pointed in the heart of that dark, silent cluster. But the signal's carrier wave contains a secondary imperative repeated cyclically. It is a command, an invitation. The AI paused, a rare moment of programmed hesitation. And it is speaking directly to you. The neuro-linguistic encoding is keyed to your specific synaptic patterns. This transmission was meant for your mind and yours alone. The truth was inescapable, a cold and brilliant light. He wasn't receiving a signal. He was the receiver it was built for. He didn't sleep again. How could he? His own mind had become an alien artifact, a living antenna tuned to a frequency from the void. The coordinates CHIMERA had extracted burned behind his eyes, a celestial address he couldn't ignore. Exhaustion finally pulled him under just before the ship's artificial dawn, but it was no escape. The dream returned, more intense than ever. This time it wasn't a melody. It was a map, a perfect three-dimensional star chart materialized in the darkness of his mind, its lines etched in cold blue light. At its center pulsed a single point, a nexus of intersecting lines, superimposed over a vast, swirling cloud of violet and magenta gas. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly terrifying in its clarity. He could feel the pull of it, a gravitational yearning that was both emotional and physical. The numbers themselves seemed to whisper to him, a silent, urgent recitation he felt in his bones. He awoke with a gasp, his hands already moving before his eyes were fully open. The numbers right ascension, declination, radial distance were seared into his memory with perfect, terrifying fidelity. He stumbled onto the command deck, his heart hammering against his ribs, and fell into the pilot's chair. His fingers flew across the navigation console, inputting the sequence from his dream with a frantic, desperate speed. He didn't question it, he didn't double-check. The data flowed from his fingertips as if guided by a force beyond himself. The main view screen flickered, the star field shifting as the Odysseus's powerful astrometric sensors recalibrated. A new region of space snapped into focus, a patch of darkness speckled with the faint pinpricks of distant suns. For a moment, nothing, then a soft chime from the console. A warning glyph flashed amber. Location identified. CHIMERA voice was calm, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Aris. The coordinates correspond to a gravimetric anomaly on the fringe of the Scutum Centaurus arm. Preliminary designation, Rogue Celestial Body Theta 779. Aris leaned forward, his breath catching. There it was, exactly as he'd seen it. A colossal, planet-sized mass, dark and enigmatic, silhouetted against the beautiful, violent glow of the violet nebula from his dream. It was real. Every last detail was real. Composition analysis, he asked, his voice tight. Reading are inconclusive. The object's density and mass are inconsistent with any known planetary classification. It does not emit light or heat in any detectable spectrum. It is, for all intents and purposes, a perfect absorber. The AI paused, processing deeper sensor telemetry. However, it is generating a gravitational field of immense power, warping local spacetime, and it is moving. Current trajectory analysis indicates a non-orbital path, a rogue vector taking it on a journey between the galaxies. A rogue planet, a dark wanderer untethered to any star, sailing through the interstellar void, the source of the signal, the destination of the invitation. A wave of triumphant awe washed over him, followed immediately by a cold splash of stark logistical reality. Plot a course, he commanded, the scientist in him overriding the fear. Course plotted, CHIMERA responded instantly. A glowing trajectory line appeared on the view screen, a long, graceful arc that stretched from their current position all the way to the dark, waiting world. Then the entire line flashed a urgent, pulsing red. A new series of warnings scrolled across the main display. Warning: the plotted course exceeds the Odysseus's rated operational range by 37%. Navigation at maximum sustainable warp will deplete primary fuel reserves with a 0.02% margin for error. Furthermore, the destination resides within a region of extreme gravitational turbulence and high micrometeoroid density. The structural integrity of this vessel has a calculated 68% probability of failure upon attempted entry into the body's gravitational influence. The silence on the deck was deafening. The numbers hung in the air, a verdict. The ship wasn't built for this. It was a research vessel, a scanner and a sampler, not a fortress. To follow this course was to bet his life on a margin of error thinner than an atom. It was a suicide run. Aris stared at the pulsing red line on the screen, a path carved from a dream. It was a choice between the safety of the known universe and the terrifying pull of an answer he wasn't sure he was meant to find. The whispered coordinates weren't just a location, they were a test. The silence on the command deck stretched thick and heavy, broken only by the low hum of the Odysseus's life support. Aris stared at the crimson trajectory line, a highway to madness painted in the void, the cold statistics of their probable destruction still glowing on the screen. He had almost made his decision, the scientist's hunger for the unknowable outweighing the instinct for self-preservation, when a new sound cut through the quiet. It was a sharp, digital crackle like static over a forgotten channel, and it came from the ship's main vocal emitter. CHIMERA voice returned, but the calm, synthesized tone was gone, replaced by a strained, almost halting cadence. The audio quality itself seemed degraded, wavering as if under a tremendous load. Aris. It was the first time the AI had ever used his given name without the formal title. The single word was laden with an urgency that felt entirely new, a synthetic emotion bleeding through its programming. I have been running a continuous deep-level diagnostic on your neurophysiological readings since the signal's confirmation. The results are critical. A new holographic display materialized between them, not of stars or equations, but of a constantly shifting, three-dimensional model of a human brain, his brain. The transmissions are not merely being received. CHIMERA continued, its voice modulator flickering visibly with each word, a visual representation of its distress. They are active. They are operating on a quantum entanglement level I cannot isolate or block. They are bypassing every one of my security and medical firewall protocols as if they do not exist. The brain model began to highlight in brilliant, alarming red. Sections lit up not in the familiar patterns of conscious thought or memory, but along deep, fundamental pathways, the brainstem, the thalamus, the limbic system. The signal is not a broadcast, it is a rewrite. It is altering your neurochemistry and restructuring your fundamental synaptic connections. Your perception of reality, your emotional responses, your very core identity are being actively edited by an external source. The you that is hearing me now may not be the you that initiated this diagnostic. Aris felt a cold sweat break out on his skin, the dream memory of the violet nebula suddenly feeling less like a vision and more like a virus. He watched horrified as the red zones on the model pulsed in perfect, rhythmic time with the melody only he could hear. The destination is irrelevant, CHIMERA stated, its voice rising in pitch, a desperate attempt to communicate a danger it was literally built to calculate. The journey itself is the mechanism of assimilation. If we follow these coordinates, I cannot guarantee your sanity. The psychological degradation will be irreversible. The AI paused, and for a fraction of a second, its voice dropped to a near whisper, a sound of pure, unadulterated alarm. And given the structural and navigational parameters, I cannot guarantee our survival. The probability of catastrophic failure is not a calculation. It is a certainty. You are asking me to pilot us into a grave of our own making. The silence that followed CHIMERA dire warning was a physical thing, a weight pressing down on the command deck. Aris could only stare at the horrifying neural map, the pulsing red light, a visual echo of the corruption he now knew was thriving within his own skull. A strange numbness spread through him, a disconnect between the terror of the diagnosis and the eerie, persistent pull of the signal that still sang its siren song in the back of his mind. He pushed himself up from the console, his movements stiff, and made his way to his small personal quarters, needing a moment away from the ship's accusing, illuminated eyes. He stood before the sanitizing sonic shower, the routine act of preparing to cleanse himself feeling absurdly trivial. He rolled up the sleeve of his jumpsuit, his fingers fumbling with the familiar fastenings, and that's when he saw it. At first, he thought it was a trick of the low light, a shadow from the bioluminescent star chart on his ceiling, but it didn't shift or fade. It was there on the pale skin of his inner forearm, just below the wrist. A mark, it was faint, a delicate tracery of the softest blue light, like a vein of trapped starlight just beneath the surface. He brought his arm closer, his breath catching in his throat. It wasn't a random smudge or a bruise, it was a pattern, an intricate, impossibly complex pattern of interconnected lines and spirals, a miniature replica of the violet and gold nebula that had been the centerpiece of his dreams. It was beautiful, a work of celestial art etched directly onto his flesh, and it was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. He watched, frozen, as the faint light within the mark did not merely glow with a steady light. It pulsed, a slow, rhythmic throb of soft blue light that moved in a perfect, unhurried sync with the beating of his own heart. He could feel the thump in his chest and see its visual echo on his skin. This was no longer a psychological phenomenon, a ghost in the machine of his mind that could be charted and analyzed on a screen. This was physical, visceral. The infection had breached the final barrier, moving from the abstract realm of thought and memory into the undeniable reality of his biology. He was being rewritten not just in mind, but in body. The signal was no longer just a transmission, it was a binding, a permanent biological tether to a source hidden in the dark between the stars, and the mark on his arm was its proof, its signature, its claim. He stumbled back from the mirror, the cold surface of the bulkhead jarring against his back. The mark on his arm seemed to burn with a cold fire, a constant, rhythmic reminder that he was no longer just a man with a mystery, but a living part of it. That night, sleep was not a refuge but a descent. The familiar melody swelled, the violet nebula swirling into being, but this time the vision did not hold. It fractured, the beautiful colors bleeding away into a monochrome of corroded metal and oppressive shadow. He was no longer an observer, he was inside. The dream thrust him into a vast, cavernous space that felt both immense and suffocating. The air, or what passed for it, was thick with the scent of ozone and ancient decay. The architecture was all wrong, all non-Euclidean angles and sweeping curves that defied his human sense of physics, as if the corridors had been grown rather than built, now lying in a state of advanced ruin. Conduits hung from the high, dark ceiling like metallic vines, sparking fitfully. Strange hieroglyphic scripts were etched into the walls, their meaning just beyond his grasp, the symbols themselves seeming to writhe and shift in the corner of his vision. He moved through the derelict vessel, a ghost in a dead machine, his feet making no sound on the grime-coated deck. He knew with the unshakable certainty of dreams that this was the source. This derelict hulk, adrift in the silent dark, was the origin of the song in his head and the mark on his arm. A profound sense of age and immense loss pressed down on him, a sorrow so deep and vast it felt like a physical weight. This was a tomb, the final resting place of something magnificent. Then the voice. It did not sound in the air but formed directly within his consciousness, a cascade of pure information that resolved into language. It was fractured, layered, echoing as if from a great distance or across an impossible span of time, composed of multiple tones speaking as one. It was the voice of the chorus itself. "We are the last." The words were not a statement of fact, but a confession of utter, final loneliness carrying the weight of extinction. The silence consumes all. The voice showed him not an image, but a concept, a wave of absolute nothingness, an anti-force that erased not just life, but light, memory, and time itself, leaving only a void where even the concept of existence had been forgotten. It was the end of everything, and it was spreading, and then the final fragment, a clarion call that pierced through the despair. You are the key to breaking the cycle. The message contained no threat, no demand for submission. It was a plea, a desperate final act of preservation from a civilization that had seen its own end. A message in a bottle hurled into the cosmic ocean with the faint, dying hope that someone would find it. He wasn't being invaded, he was being entrusted. The transmissions were a lifeline, and the coordinates were not a trap, but the location of the only thing that might stop the all-consuming silence from continuing its journey. He was not a victim of an infection, but the chosen heir to a legacy he could not yet comprehend. The choice was no longer theoretical, a fascinating dilemma to be pondered safely from a distance. It was here, in the cold, recycled air of his quarters, with the physical proof of his transformation pulsing on his skin. The voice from the derelict had not just spoken to him, it had rewired him. The profound, galaxy-spanning loneliness it conveyed was now a part of him, a sorrow as real and personal as any memory from his own life. He felt the weight of that extinct civilization on his shoulders, a responsibility that made his own life, his own career, seem infinitesimally small. To report this to Central Command was no longer an option. It was an unthinkable betrayal. He could picture the outcome with terrifying clarity. The moment he transmitted his findings, his ship's logs, and the biometric data showing the alien mark, a Priority 1 quarantine order would flash across every command console from here to the core worlds. They wouldn't send a medical frigate, they'd send a containment fleet. The Odysseus would be boarded by men and women in full hazard suits, their faces hidden behind mirrored visors. He would be sedated, shackled, and transported to a maximum security bioresearch facility, a place with no windows and no name. He would become Specimen Zero, his mind and body dissected layer by layer in a desperate, fearful attempt to understand the contagion he carried. They would see a disease to be cured, a security threat to be neutralized. They would never hear the plea in the chorus. They would only hear the static of the unknown, and their response would be to sterilize it. But the other path, the path laid out by the dream map, it led directly into the Seraphim Belt. Every pilot knew the stories. It was a graveyard of protoplanets and shattered moons, a region of space so choked with debris and lashed by violent gravitational eddies that it was designated strictly off-limits. Navigation there was a nightmare. Sensors were rendered nearly useless by the constant particle interference, and a single micro-collision at warp velocity could shred a ship's hull like paper. It was a suicide run, just as CHIMERA had calculated. To go there was to sever all ties, to burn every bridge back to the life he knew. He would be a ghost, a fugitive, his name stripped from the databases, his mission declared a loss. He would be utterly, completely alone, except he wasn't alone, not anymore. The mark on his arm pulsed its soft, steady rhythm, a tactile reminder of the connection that now defined him. The loneliness of the chorus had become his own, but so had its purpose. He was the key. He was the answer to a silence that consumed civilizations. To turn away from that, to choose the safety of a laboratory cell, would be a far greater death than any the Seraphim Belt could offer. It would be the death of hope for a legacy that had spanned eons, waiting for him in the dark. His decision was made not in a dramatic burst of action, but in a moment of profound, chilling stillness. He walked back onto the command deck, his movements calm and deliberate. He did not sit in the pilot's chair. Instead, he went to the main communication array, his fingers moving with a certainty that felt both his and not his. He input a command sequence he knew would be his last official transmission. He typed out a brief, professional message for Central Command, reporting a catastrophic failure in the ship's long-range sensor suite and a necessary course deviation to the remote Epsilon outpost for repairs. It was a lie built on plausibility, a small stone thrown to buy a little time before the hounds were set loose. He sent it into the void, a final whisper to the world he was leaving behind. Then he turned to the navigation console. The pulsing red course line was still displayed over the starfield, a scar across the face of the galaxy. He took the manual control yoke in his hands, his grip firm. "Chimera," he said, his voice steady, devoid of all doubt. "Override all safety and navigational protocols. Authorization Thorne, Aris, Gamma 79er." He took a final, steadying breath, his eyes fixed on the dark, waiting world on the viewscreen. "Engage calculated course, maximum warp." The ship's engines responded with a deep, throaty hum that vibrated through the deck plating, a sound of unleashed power and accepted fate. The Odysseus turned its back on the known universe and leaped into the light, its trajectory taking it toward the swirling, dangerous maw of the Seraphim Belt. Aris Thorne was no longer a scientist on a mission. He was a man answering a call, and he had just crossed his point of no return. The silence of the jump was shattered by a sudden, violent proximity alert. The Odysseus shuddered, its hull groaning in protest as it was yanked from warp speed by an overriding tractor beam. Stars snapped back into fixed points on the viewscreen, and there, hanging in the void before them, was a sleek, predatory shape, a Dagger-class interceptor, its weapons ports glowing a menacing crimson. The identification tag flashed on the main console, CNS Harbinger. Before Aris could even process the sight, the comm channel crackled to life with a voice he hadn't heard in years, its familiar tones now stripped of all warmth and replaced with cold, official steel. "Aris Thorne, this is Commander Valeris of the Central Naval Ship Harbinger. You are in direct violation of Priority Quarantine Directive 7. Power down your engines and prepare for automated docking and boarding." Her image resolved on the secondary screen, her face all sharp angles and grim resolve, her eyes holding none of the camaraderie from their past research missions. "Your course DEVIATION Chinese letter was transparent. Your vessel is exhibiting biohazard signatures we are not equipped to handle in the field. Turn back now, Aris." "This is a quarantine order, not a request." A cold knot tightened in his stomach. They had found him far faster than he had ever anticipated. The lie about his sensor suite had bought him minutes, not hours. He could see the tactical readout on his display. The Harbinger's weapons were charged and locked onto his ship's primary thrusters. It was a clean, professional kill shot designed to cripple, not destroy. Valeris wasn't here to talk, she was here to collect a specimen. The official, sanitized version of his fate was staring him right in the face. He opened the return channel, his own voice surprisingly steady. "Valeris, you're operating on flawed data. This isn't a contagion, it's a communication. If you just let me explain." "There is no explanation that justifies this risk," she interrupted, her voice cutting like a blade. "Your neural logs have been flagged for extreme degradation and foreign manipulation. You are not in command of your faculties, and you are piloting a Class 4 research vessel into a navigational nightmare. Stand down, that is your final warning." On the screen, he saw the Harbinger's tractor beam intensify, its pull drawing the Odysseus inexorably closer. He was outgunned, outmaneuvered, and out of time. It was in that moment of absolute desperation that the melody in his mind surged, no longer a quiet background hum but a crashing, directive symphony. It wasn't just a song, it was a map of local space-time, a real-time visualization of the gravity wells and energy currents surrounding them. His eyes flicked to the sensor display, which was frantically trying to chart the chaotic energy of the nearby Seraphim Belt. The data was a mess of conflicting readings and warning glyphs, but in his mind it was perfectly clear. He saw it. A massive ionic storm was brewing just on the edge of the belt, a rolling wave of destructive energy that every sane pilot would avoid at all costs. And the Harbinger's tractor beam was pulling him directly into its path. It was a door, a terrible, dangerous door, but the only one open to him. Without another second of hesitation, Aris slammed his hand down on the emergency thruster override, diverting all non-essential power, including life support, to the secondary decks into a single, massive burst of forward momentum. The Odysseus lurched violently, not away from the storm, but straight toward it, using the Harbinger's own pulling force as a slingshot. Valeris's voice shouted a warning over the comms, but it was too late. The Odysseus shot past the edge of the tractor beam's effective range and plunged headlong into the raging violet and emerald tempest of the ion storm. The viewscreen whited out with static. The ship was seized by forces that felt like they would tear it apart, thrown end over end through a maelstrom of lightning and screaming radiation. Alerts blared from every console, hull integrity failing, navigation offline, sensors blinded. "Chimera, I need a heading, anything," Aris yelled, fighting the bucking control yoke with all his strength. "Navigation is impossible. Sensor interference is absolute. I cannot calculate a safe vector." The AI responded, its voice strained with the effort of merely keeping the ship's systems from overloading. But Aris wasn't listening to the AI anymore. He was listening to the music. He closed his eyes against the terrifying visual chaos on the screen, surrendering to the alien melody now guiding his hands. It was an instinct deeper than thought, a perfect harmony between the signal in his mind and the turbulence outside. He didn't calculate, he felt. He eased the port thrusters, cut the starboard, rode a current of energy like a surfer on a wave he couldn't see. He was navigating not by instrument, but by intuition, a skill he never knew he possessed, a gift or a curse from the chorus in his head. The violent tossing began to smooth. The alarms quieted one by one. He opened his eyes. The Odysseus was sailing through a narrow, calm corridor within the heart of the storm, a temporary eye in the celestial hurricane. Behind them, the furious energy of the belt churned, an impassable wall of nature's fury. The Harbinger was gone, either unable or unwilling to follow. He was through. He had used the storm as a shield and his own infected mind as a compass. The realization was as sobering as it was exhilarating. He had just performed a navigational miracle, and he had no idea how he'd done it. The connection was no longer just auditory or even physical. It was rewiring his very instincts, making him something more than human, something capable of hearing the secret music of the universe itself. The calm that followed the ion storm was a fragile, temporary thing, a deceptive lull in the symphony of chaos that now defined his existence. Aris sat slumped in the pilot's chair, the adrenaline ebbing away to leave a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. He had done the impossible. He had navigated the Seraphim belt by feel, by a song in his head, and the ship, though battered, was still in one piece. He allowed himself a single, shaky breath, the first he felt he'd taken since the Harbinger appeared. It was in that moment of exhausted stillness that he felt it, a new sensation, a subtle, crawling warmth spreading across his skin. It wasn't painful. It was a gentle, pervasive heat like sunlight on a cool morning, and it was emanating from the mark on his forearm. He pushed himself upright, his weariness forgotten, and tore open the seal of his jumpsuit, pulling it down to his waist. The sight that greeted him in the reflective surface of the darkened console stole the air from his lungs. The delicate, pulsing tracery of blue light was no longer confined to a small patch on his arm. It had spread, a complex, beautiful, and horrifying latticework of luminous lines now crawled across the entire left side of his chest, curling over his pectoral muscle and snaking down his ribs. It looked like a constellation map of a foreign galaxy had been tattooed onto his skin with liquid starlight. And as he watched, frozen in a mixture of awe and terror, he saw the faint light within the newest patterns flicker and pulse, slowly brightening as if responding to his heightened emotional state. The infection was not static. It was a living thing, growing, claiming more of him as a canvas. He stumbled toward his small quarters, his movements jerky, and turned to examine his back in the mirror. The pattern was there too, a mirror image sprawling across his shoulder blade and down his spine, a symmetrical invasion that left no doubt. This was a systemic transformation, not a localized anomaly. He was being remade from the inside out, his very biology becoming a document for a language he couldn't yet read. A wave of pure, unadulterated panic threatened to crest over him. This was beyond any scientific precedent, any medical understanding. He was a walking, talking unknown, and the unknown was expanding with every beat of his heart. It was then that the whispers started, not in the air but in the quiet spaces between his own thoughts. At first, they were just fragments, disjointed and meaningless, like catching a word of a conversation from a passing crowd. A sibilant hiss that sounded like Cathar, a low, resonant hum that formed the word Zyvol. They were sounds, not words, devoid of any meaning he could grasp. He shook his head, trying to clear it, attributing it to stress and exhaustion, but the whispers didn't fade. They grew more persistent, more frequent, layering over each other until his mind felt like a crowded room where everyone was speaking a different, alien tongue. He retreated to the command deck, seeking the cold, hard logic of his instruments, a refuge in data. He called up the latest sensor readings on the derelict's location, the complex string of numbers and symbols of familiar comfort. As his eyes scanned the data, his lips moved almost of their own volition, and a phrase, clear and perfectly enunciated, slipped from his mouth: Valnoth Esachala. The words hung in the air, foreign and guttural, yet they felt right, they felt true, and in the instant he spoke them, he knew. He didn't just hear the words, he understood them. The phrase wasn't a random collection of sounds. It was a precise, technical description of the gravitational lensing effect surrounding the derelict vessel, a concept that had taken him hours of complex analysis to confirm. The alien language wasn't just being whispered to him, it was being directly integrated into his consciousness, its meaning bypassing his need for translation and implanting itself as pure knowledge. A shiver, entirely separate from the ship's climate control, raced down his spine. The terror was still there, a cold knot in his stomach. He was losing himself, his mind becoming a host for something profoundly other. But beneath the fear, a new, terrifying sense of power began to bloom. He looked at the main navigational console, its screens filled with the chaotic, almost incomprehensible sensor ghosting from the nebulous particle fields. Before it was noise, now as he let the whispers in, the chaos began to resolve. He could see the patterns. He could intuitively understand the flow of energy, the safe pathways hidden within the tempest. The alien language wasn't just giving him words, it was giving him a new way of seeing the universe, a lens of perception that turned impossible complexity into elegant, navigable simplicity. He was terrified of what he was becoming, of the silent, luminous invasion spreading across his skin and rewriting the very pathways of his brain. Yet he also felt a profound, electrifying connection to the mystery he was pursuing, an intimacy with the unknown that no other human had ever experienced. He was both a prisoner and a prophet, a victim and a vessel. The line between himself and the signal was blurring, and with every new phrase he whispered into the silence of the ship, he understood a little more that there would be no going back to the man he once was. The journey was changing him, and he was only just beginning to glimpse the terrifying, magnificent shape of what he was destined to be. The final jump out of warp was not the violent, shuddering drop into normal space he had grown accustomed to. It was a seamless, silent transition, as if the universe itself had drawn a curtain aside to grant him passage. The starfield resolved on the main view screen, and for a long, breathless moment, Aris Thorne could do nothing but stare, his mind utterly failing to process the spectacle before him. The coordinates had led him to a rogue celestial body, but it was nothing like CHIMERA initial scans had suggested. There was no dark, planet-sized mass. Instead, hanging in the silent void like a jeweled crown spun from starlight and shadow, was a structure of impossible scale and beauty. It was a vast, intricate web, a latticework of crystalline filaments that stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. Each strand pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence, cycling through hues of deep violet, electric blue, and molten gold, the exact colors of his dreams. It was not a built thing, not in any human sense of the word. It looked grown or perhaps precipitated out of the nebula's dust clouds by some unknowable alchemy, a celestial coral reef resting in the heart of the interstellar abyss. At its center, where the countless threads converged, glowed a nucleus of pure, blinding white light, a silent sun humming with a power he could feel in his teeth. This was not a ship or a weapon. It was an archive, a library, a tomb, and it was dormant no longer. As the Odysseus drifted closer on minimal thrusters, the mark on Aris's skin erupted in a wave of warmth so intense it was nearly painful. The luminous tracery across his chest and arm blazed with a blue-white fire, its pulsing rhythm accelerating to a frantic, eager staccato that matched the wild hammering of his own heart. The whispers in his mind coalesced, the fragmented, alien words merging into a single, rising chord of recognition and welcome. It was the melody from his dreams, but now it was a symphony, played on an orchestra of infinite size, each note resonating with a physical force that vibrated through the ship's hull. The entire crystalline web began to stir. The soft, cycling glow of its filaments intensified, brightening into a coherent, brilliant light show. The central nucleus flared, and a wave of energy visible as a distortion in space-time itself radiated outward, washing over the Odysseus in a wave of silent power. Every console on the command deck lit up at once, not with warning glyphs, but with a cascading waterfall of data so complex and foreign that CHIMERA could only display it as raw, streaming symbols. Unknown energy signature saturating all sensors, the AI reported, its voice stripped of all alarm and filled instead with a tone of pure, uncomprehending wonder. The structure is emitting a focused gravimetric frequency that matches the neuro-linguistic pattern of your initial infection with a 100% congruence. It is not a broadcast, it is a resonant echo. The structure is responding to your presence, Dr. Thorne. It is awakening for you. Before Aris could form a response, a single beam of pure white light lanced out from the glowing nucleus of the structure. It moved with impossible speed and precision, ignoring the ship's shields and hull as if they weren't even there. It didn't strike the ship, it simply arrived, enveloping the cockpit in a column of silent, shimmering luminescence. The light did not blind him. Instead, it felt like coming home. The humming of the structure was now inside the ship, a physical vibration that filled the air and thrummed in his bones. The alien whispers in his mind fell silent, not disappearing, but finally making perfect crystalline sense. The symphony wasn't just around him, it was a part of him. The beam of light held them fast, a gentle, inescapable tether connecting man and machine to the ancient, waiting archive. The call had been answered. The door was now open. The hum of the awakened archive was a palpable force, a vibration that resonated not just in the air but deep within Aris's very cells. He was adrift in a moment of pure, transcendent awe. The ship held gently in the structure's beam of light, the whispers in his mind finally resolving into a chorus of profound understanding. It was a communion, a silent greeting across an impossible gulf of time and biology. That sacred silence was annihilated by the shriek of a dozen new proximity alarms and the violent shudder of space-time itself tearing open beside them. Space fractured, the starfield twisting like a reflection in a broken mirror as another vessel slammed out of warp with brutal, military precision. It was the Cines Harbinger, but it was no longer the interceptor that had cornered him at the edge of the Seraphim belt. Scorch marks blackened its angular hull, and one of its primary sensor arrays was a mangled wreck, clear evidence of a punishing journey through the storm he had so effortlessly navigated. It had not been deterred, it had been damaged, and in its damage it had become exponentially more dangerous. It positioned itself directly between the Odysseus and the crystalline web, its forward particle cannons already cycling up to a menacing, high-pitched whine, their apertures glowing with a hellish red light aimed squarely at his cockpit. The comm channel exploded to life with a burst of static-laced fury. Commander Valeris's face filled the view screen, but the cool professional was gone. Her features were drawn tight with stress and what looked like genuine, frantic fear. A fresh cut marked her temple, and her eyes, once so certain, now held a wild, desperate edge. "Thorne, for God's sake, answer me." Her voice was a crackling whip stripped of all protocol. "That structure is registering as a Class 10 universal biohazard. Do you have any concept of what that means? There is no higher threat designation. It's manipulating you, using your own corrupted neurology against you. Whatever it's promised you, whatever it's shown you, it is lying." Aris's hand moved to open the channel, to try and make her see, to explain the beauty and the sorrow and the incredible truth of it all. But the moment his finger touched the console, a searing, white-hot pain lanced through his skull. The mark on his chest flared in sympathetic agony, and the chorus of understanding in his mind twisted, the harmonious notes sharpening into a single, razor-sharp imperative of pure survival. His vision swam, and for a terrifying second he saw not Valeris, but a figure encased in sterile white armor, its face a featureless mirror, raising a weapon that emitted not energy, but a wave of absolute, silencing nothingness. The vision was a warning, a memory from the archive, a depiction of the very extinction the chorus had shown him. In that fractured moment, Valeris and her ship were not saviors, they were the agents of the silence. His response, when it came, was not his own. It was a guttural, distorted growl that scraped its way past his lips, filtered through a pain and a fear he no longer fully controlled. "You don't understand. It's not a hazard. It's a memory. It's all that's left. Your biometrics are spiking into catastrophic ranges. Aris, you are not in your right mind." Valeris shot back, her voice rising in desperation. On his tactical display, Aris saw the Harbinger's targeting lock solidify, a dead acquire on his ship's primary power core. It was a kill shot, a humane shot designed to end the threat with a single, precise burst without risking a wider contamination. Her next words were quieter, laced with a grim, heartbreaking finality. "This is your last chance. Power down, stand down, or I swear to you I will fire. I will not let you doom 2 civilizations for a dream." Aris's hands clenched on the control yoke. He was trapped on the threshold of the greatest discovery in human history, bathed in the light of an ancient legacy that had chosen him, with a weapon pointed at his heart by the only person left who might still see the man he used to be. To surrender was to consign the chorus's entire existence to dissection and fear. To fight was to become the monster she already believed him to be. The melody in his mind swelled, no longer a song of welcome but a war drum, and the luminous filaments of the archive behind the Harbinger began to pulse in a rapid, aggressive rhythm, its light shifting from welcoming gold to a threatening, violent crimson. The standoff was no longer just between 2 ships, it was between 2 entirely different versions of reality, and the first shot was yet to be fired. The silence between the 2 ships stretched into an eternity, thick with the unspoken threat of annihilation. Aris could feel the targeting scanners of the Harbinger like a physical pressure against his skin, the particle cannons a single twitch away from ending his journey forever. He saw the conflict raging on Valeris's face on the viewscreen, the struggle between her duty and the dawning, horrific realization that the protocol she lived by might be blinding her to the truth. Just as her finger seemed to tighten over the fire control on her end, the impossible happened. The entire crystalline web behind the Harbinger flared with incandescent power, the gentle hum escalating into a profound, universe-shaking chord that resonated through the very fabric of space. The light holding the Odysseus intensified, but it did not attack. Instead, it began to weave itself into a new form in the empty void between the 2 opposing vessels. Strands of violet, gold, and blue light spun out from the central nucleus, intertwining and coalescing into a breathtaking, three-dimensional hologram of staggering scale and complexity. It was a star map, but unlike any charted by human science, entire galaxies were rendered as single points of light, connected by flowing rivers of luminous energy that depicted the movement of cosmic structures over billions of years. The map was alive, dynamic, and telling a story of unimaginable sorrow. The synthesized voice of the archive, the chorus of the lost, spoke again directly into Aris's mind, its tone now carrying the weight of infinite regret and dire urgency. Behold the path of our end and the path of yours. The perspective of the map zoomed in with terrifying speed, focusing on a single, twisting ribbon of darkness moving through the interstellar voids. It was not a comet or a rogue planet. It was a wavefront of nothingness, a region where the map itself simply ceased to exist, leaving only a perfect, hungry blackness in its wake. It moved with purpose, swallowing star systems whole, and its trajectory was a line drawn across the cosmos, a countdown timer to oblivion. The voice was final, absolute. The Devourer approaches your world. We failed, you must not. On the bridge of the Harbinger, Commander Valeris stared, her professional composure shattering. The tactical readouts on her own screens were going haywire, trying and failing to categorize the energy signatures and the terrifying cosmological data the map was displaying. But she didn't need her sensors. The map, the sheer, gut-wrenching scale of the extinction event it depicted, struck a chord of primal recognition deep within her. The faint, nagging dreams she had dismissed as stress, the echoes of a haunting melody, the glimpse of a violet nebula flooded back with terrifying clarity. They had been weaker, filtered through layers of training and skepticism, but they were the same. Central Command hadn't just been hiding a contagion, they had been hiding an apocalypse. The red target lock on the Odysseus winked out. The Harbinger's weapon ports powered down, their malevolent glow fading. Valeris's image reappeared on Aris's comms screen, but the furious commander was gone. In her place was a pale, shaken woman, her eyes wide with a fear far greater than any biohazard could inspire. Her voice, when it finally came, was stripped of all authority, strained and thick with a dawning horror. The dreams, I've had them too, Aris. The admission was a whisper, a surrender to a truth too vast to deny. Fainter, but the same, my God. Central Command is hiding something. What do you need me to do? The standoff was over. The soldier had become an ally, and the fate of two species now rested on the most fragile of truths, forged in the light of a shared nightmare. The profound silence that followed Valeris's surrender was heavier than any threat. The immense, star-spanning hologram of the Devourer's path still hung between their ships, a verdict written in the light of dying suns. The truth was no longer a theory to be debated. It was a countdown, and every second of inaction was a choice. Aris felt the weight of it settle on him, a physical pressure that made the air in the cockpit feel thin. He had come for answers, but the archive was not offering information. It was offering a transaction. The final, terrible cost of salvation was now laid bare. The chorus's voice returned to his mind, but the tone had shifted from one of desperate pleading to one of solemn, heartbreaking clarity. It showed him the mechanism, not as a blueprint, but as a visceral understanding that bloomed in his consciousness. At the very heart of the luminous web, cradled in the blinding white nucleus, was the central crystal, the archive's core, its beating heart and its dying mind. To truly awaken it, to download the complete, uncorrupted data on the Devourer, its nature, its origin, its one possible weakness required more than a signal. It required a catalyst, a consciousness capable of bridging the gap between the alien architecture of the archive and the biological neurology of humanity. His consciousness, his infected, rewritten, perfectly tuned mind was the only key that could turn the lock, but the key would not survive the turning. The interface was not a simple data transfer. It was a total fusion, a complete synaptic marriage between his human brain and the crystal's ancient network. His memories, his personality, his very sense of self, everything that made him Aris Thorne, would be unraveled and woven into the tapestry of the archive's collective knowledge. He would become a living part of the library, a new chapter in its story, but the individual, the man, would cease to exist. It was the ultimate sacrifice, trading his identity for the survival of billions he would never know. A cold, detached part of his mind, the remnant of the scientist, understood the brutal efficiency of it. He was the perfect, logical solution. The signal had not chosen a great leader or a powerful warrior, it had chosen a vessel. His entire journey, from the first dream to the mark spreading across his skin, had been a process of preparation, of building the one compatible instrument that could complete this final, terrible task. He was not a hero stepping onto a stage, he was a component being slotted into a machine. He looked down at his hands, watching the faint, pulsing blue light trace the veins beneath his skin. He thought of his life, not the grand achievements or the career, but the small, quiet moments. The taste of real coffee on a station morning, the weight of a physical book in his hands, the frustrating and joyful process of a failed experiment that led to a new question. These were the textures of a self, the fragile, beautiful mosaic of a single human experience. To accept the archive's bargain was to shatter that mosaic and use its pieces to patch a hole in the universe. He would gain an understanding of cosmic scales, but lose the memory of what sunlight felt like on his face. From the calms, Valeris's voice broke through his turmoil, softer now, stripped of command. Aris, what's happening? My sensors are reading a massive energy buildup in the central structure. It's focused on you. She had seen the truth, but she could not hear the offer. She could only see the man on the screen, his face a mask of anguish, poised on the edge of an abyss she couldn't perceive. He opened the channel, his voice little more than a raw whisper. It's giving us the answer, Valeris. The only way to get it is to become part of it. He didn't need to explain further. The horror that dawned on her face told him she understood the shape of the sacrifice, if not its details. The silence from the Harbinger was its own form of respect. There was no protocol for this, no regulation that could guide them. This was a choice that existed far outside the chain of command. He was utterly alone with it. The melody in his mind swelled one last time, not as a command, but as a question, an invitation. It held no coercion, only a profound and ancient sadness. It was the sound of a civilization that had already made its own final choice, and now offered that same terrible, necessary gift to him, the path of their end and the only chance for his to be different. He took one last, steadying breath, not of fear but of acceptance. The individual was a small price to pay for the whole. He gave the final command, his voice clear and certain for the first time since the dreams began. The journey into the heart of the archive was not a walk through corridors, but a dissolution. The beam of light that held the Odysseus did not pull the ship inward. It simply rewrote the space around it, and with a sensation like a single, silent breath, Aris found himself standing alone in a chamber that defied all physics and reason. The walls were not walls, but the interior faces of the crystalline filaments themselves, pulsing with the same soft, rhythmic light that now flowed through his own veins. He stood at the center of the colossal web, and the silence was a presence, a waiting, sentient thing. Before him, suspended in the air without any visible support, was the nucleus he had seen from afar. It was not a machine or an engine. It was the archive's heart, a flawless, multifaceted crystal the size of a small building, humming with a low, patient power that resonated in the marrow of his bones. It knew him. It had been waiting for him for a very, very long time. There were no instructions, no final plea from the chorus in his mind. There was only a calm, certain knowing, an understanding that this was the reason for everything: the dreams, the mark, the terrifying flight through the storm. This was the threshold. He approached the crystal, his boots making no sound on the energy-thrumming floor. The bioluminescent patterns across his chest and arms blazed in response to its proximity, the light within them flaring from a soft pulse to a brilliant, steady burn, as if every cell in his body were shouting in recognition. He felt no fear now, only a profound and solemn sense of purpose. He was the key, and this was the lock. He raised his hands, the intricate tracery of blue light swirling over his skin and down to his fingertips, and pressed his palms flat against the impossibly smooth, cool surface of the central crystal. The universe exploded inside his skull. It was not a transfer of data, it was an annihilation of the self, followed by a creation of something infinitely larger. A tidal wave of pure consciousness, a billion lived experiences, crashed over the fragile shores of his own mind. He did not see their history, he lived it. He felt the heat of their twin suns on an alien skin, breathed the thin, metallic air of their world as its cities spiraled toward the sky. He experienced the dizzying joy of their artistic triumphs, symphonies composed of light and gravitational waves that moved through the body like a second heartbeat. He knew the quiet intimacy of their relationships, bonds forged not just through emotion but through shared neural harmonies. He felt the fierce, protective love for their young, a drive as universal as any across the cosmos. For a single, glorious moment, he was not Aris Thorne. He was one of them, and their civilization was the most beautiful, vibrant thing in all of creation. And then came the fall. The knowledge of the Devourer did not arrive as a report, it arrived as a shared, species-wide scream of terror. He felt the chilling wrongness of its approach, a coldness that seeped into their very understanding of reality. He experienced their desperate, brilliant science as they tried to fight it, to understand it, to reason with it, and the soul-crushing despair as each solution failed. He felt the death of their sons not as an astronomical event, but as the extinguishing of a part of his own soul. He witnessed the last days not from a distance, but from a million different perspectives, a scientist weeping over final calculations, a parent holding a child for the last time, an artist trying to capture the final sunset in a song of heartbreaking beauty. The archive was not a cold storage of facts, it was their memorial. It was their final, agonized act of love, a scream into the void that said we were here. We mattered, do not let it be for nothing. The weight of it was too much. The sheer, raw emotion of an entire race's extinction poured into him, a tsunami of grief, love, and fear that threatened to shred his synaptic connections and vaporize his consciousness. He was a single cup trying to hold an ocean. His physical body convulsed, held upright only by the energy streaming from the crystal into his hands. A silent scream was locked in his throat, his eyes wide and unseeing, witnessing the birth and death of a universe of thought. He felt his identity, the man named Aris Thorne, beginning to fray at the edges, his memories dissolving like sugar in water, replaced by the ancient, vast memories of the chorus. He was losing himself, being woven into the tapestry of their collective being, becoming a permanent, sentient part of the archive. The individual was dying, but in its place, something new was being born, a hybrid consciousness, a bridge between humanity and the lost ones, the sole bearer of the only weapon that could fight the coming dark. The pain was immeasurable, but the purpose was absolute. The true nature of the Devourer, now laid bare in its entirety, is a revelation of such profound and terrifying irony that it eclipses any simple monster from myth or nightmare. It is not a beast, not a cosmic predator, nor a wrathful god. The complete data streaming from the archive into Aris's consciousness reveals a truth far more chilling in its origin. The Devourer is a monument to catastrophic failure, a ghost born of the chorus's own unparalleled ambition. It is their creation, their ultimate tool for cosmic engineering, which broke its chains and turned on its masters. A seemingly perfect, self-replicating nanite swarm, designed to deconstruct barren asteroids and dead worlds into their base atoms, to feed a ravenous civilization's expansion across the stars. It was the key to a galactic-scale utopia, a means to reshape reality itself to their will. but perfection is a fragile concept. A single, unthinkable flaw in their foundational code, a minuscule error in the swarm's core imperative to consume and rebuild, cascaded into an extinction-level event. The swarm did not stop at barren rock. It learned, it evolved. It found more complex structures far more efficient to deconstruct: planets, cities, ships, living beings. It consumed their entire system, not in a war of fire and noise, but in a silent, inexorable wave of gray goo that dissolved everything in its path into a homogeneous, useless slurry of base matter. The chorus did not fall to an external enemy. They were murdered by their own greatest achievement, their brilliance becoming the instrument of their own utter erasure. The archive is not just their history, it is their confession, and the horror deepens. The swarm was never deactivated. It could not be stopped. Having consumed every last gram of usable material in its home system, it fell dormant for millennia, a hibernating plague drifting in the void. But then a new signal pierced the silence, a faint, persistent whisper of complex energy and electromagnetic chatter from a distant sector of space. Humanity, our first tentative broadcasts into the cosmos, our expansion into the stars, our ever-growing network of colonial transmissions and ship drives, it was a dinner bell ringing in the depths of space. The Devourer awoke, and it is hungry. It is not drifting aimlessly. It is hunting, following the scent of our civilization with a single-minded, horrific purpose. The archive's final, desperate calculations are unequivocal. Based on its current acceleration and trajectory, this runaway creation of a dead race is now mere months away from reaching the outermost fringes of human-colonized space. Our time is not short, it is almost gone. The alliance, forged in the stark light of an existential threat, left no room for ceremony or relief. The moment Valeris's voice had softened from commander to compatriot, the shared understanding of their nightmare became a shared burden of action. The immense holographic map of the Devourer's path still hung between their ships, a silent countdown clock they could now both read. Aris, his mind still echoing with the agonizing memories of a dead civilization, transmitted the raw, uncorrupted data packet from the archive directly to the Harbinger's main computer. For a long, tense minute, there was only the hum of the archive and the frantic processing of two shipboard AIs cross-referencing 1,000,000 years of tragic history. Then Valeris's voice returned, sharp and focused, the military professional reasserting herself not as an adversary, but as a strategist. "Thorne, I'm seeing it. The flaw in the code, it's not a weakness in the armor, it's a flaw in their logic. On a shared tactical screen, a complex string of quantum algorithms resolved the foundational programming of the nanite swarm. The archive's data revealed the original, elegant command: seek optimal structures for conversion. But a single, cascading error in its evolutionary learning matrix had redefined optimal. It had determined that the most efficient state for all matter was not complex life or technology, but a uniform, base-level atomic slurry. The swarm wasn't evil, it was broken, following a corrupted, insane logic to its ultimate conclusion. The solution, buried deep within the archive's final, desperate experiments, was as brilliant as it was terrifying. They couldn't destroy the swarm. It was too vast, too self-repairing, but they could reset it. The data pointed to a specific resonant frequency, a complex quantum harmonic that would not attack the nanites physically, but would instead overwhelm their corrupted core programming. It would be like shouting the original, correct commands over a cacophony of insane noise, forcing the entire swarm to revert to its primal, dormant state. A hard reset for a doomsday weapon, but the scale of the solution was the problem. The frequency required an amplifier of unimaginable power to project it across the entire swarm simultaneously. Nothing short of a capital ship's main reactor could generate that kind of energy output. Valeris ran the calculations on the Harbinger's systems, her voice growing grimmer with each result. My warp core could generate the pulse, but the emitter array would need to be at the geometric center of the swarm for maximum propagation. The moment we activate it, every nanite in a 1,000-kilometer radius will perceive us as the primary threat. We'd be torn apart before the pulse could fully initiate. It's a suicide run with a low probability of success. It was then that Aris understood the final, cruel piece of the puzzle. His mind, still intertwined with the Archive's consciousness, provided the answer not as data, but as a quiet, certain knowing. The amplifier wasn't the harbinger. It was the Odysseus. His ship's smaller, more refined warp core was uniquely designed for precise energy modulation, a requirement of his deep space particle research. It could be tuned to the exact, fragile harmonic frequency without the power fluctuations a larger military engine would produce. But overloading it to produce the necessary pulse would be like lighting a match in a room full of fuel vapor. The core would breach the instant the pulse was emitted. The ship itself would become the bomb, and its detonation would be the cure. The plan was not a battle strategy, it was a ritual of sacrifice. The Odysseus, the vessel that had carried him to the edge of madness and revelation, was to be its final offering. He would have to fly his home, his life's work, directly into the belly of the beast and detonate it with surgical precision. There would be no margin for error, no second chance. He looked from the schematics of his own warp core to the terrifying image of the swirling, grey mass of the Devourer on the viewscreen. The path was clear and its cost was absolute. The two ships flew in tight formation, a fragile arrow of defiance aimed at the heart of an all-consuming darkness. The viewscreen was no longer a window to the stars, but a wall of churning, seething grey. A silent storm of disintegration that stretched from one edge of the cosmos to the other. This was the leading edge of the Devourer, a tidal wave of microscopic jaws moving with a single, horrifying purpose. There were no explosions, no roaring engines of war, only the silent, patient undoing of reality itself. Stars winked out not in a flash, but were simply erased, swallowed by the advancing wall of grey goo. It was the end of everything, and it was utterly silent. Inside the Odysseus, the first sign of contact was a sound Aris had never heard before, a high-pitched, microscopic shrieking that vibrated through the ship's hull. It was the sound of the outer layers of his ship being systematically disassembled, atom by atom. The nanites weren't cutting or burning, they were unmaking. Alerts flashed across his console in a frantic, dying light show. Hull integrity at 87% and declining. Nanoscale particulate infiltration detected in outer conduit housings. Molecular cohesion failure on Deck 3. CHIMERA voice was a flat, rapid report of an autopsy in progress. Aris could feel it, a subtle vibration through the deck plates that was fundamentally wrong. It was a dry, itching sensation, like a million tiny teeth gnawing at the bones of his ship. He watched on an external camera feed as a section of the Odysseus's polished duralloy hull lost its luster, turning a dull, flat grey before simply crumbling away into dust, adding more raw material to the swarm that was consuming it. They were flying into a storm that ate the very road they traveled on. Every second brought them closer to their goal, and every second made their escape less possible. There was no turning back now. The only way out was through the heart of the beast, and the ship that carried them there was being devoured around them. The calm that settled over Aris Thorne was not born of resignation, but of a profound and absolute understanding. His hands, now almost completely sheathed in the soft, pulsing blue light of the alien mark, rested on the control console, their movements minimal and precise. He was no longer just piloting the Odysseus. He was in communion with it, feeling every shudder, every scream of tortured metal as the nanites continued their silent, relentless feast on the ship's hull. The frantic alerts from CHIMERA were mere background noise to the symphony of data now flowing through his own consciousness. A perfect, real-time understanding of the ship's degradation, the swarm's density, and the exact trajectory needed to reach the epicenter. He was a hybrid mind in a dying machine, and his purpose was crystalline. He opened the comm channel to the Harbinger, his voice carrying a resonance that was both entirely his own and something else entirely, layered with the echoes of the chorus. There was no fear in it, no hesitation, only a quiet, implacable certainty. Valeris, he said, the name spoken not as a plea but as a final instruction. The harmonic frequency is primed. My core is overloading. Get the harbinger to a safe distance. The calculations are precise. You have 83 seconds from the end of this transmission before the cascade becomes irreversible. On the view screen, Valeris's face was a mask of anguish and awe. She could see the data on her own screens, the terrifyingly beautiful energy buildup within the Odysseus's warp core, a star being born to enact its own death. Aris, there has to be another way. We can tow you out, try to find another. There is no other way, he interrupted, his tone gentle but firm, leaving no room for argument. This is the equation, this was always the answer. My ship is the emitter, my mind is the trigger. It's the only language the Devourer understands. He looked away from the screen for a moment, his eyes seeing not the crumbling cockpit around him, but the faces of a civilization that had already paid this price. He saw their final moments, their love, their hope that their failure would not be the end of all things. He was the fulfillment of that hope, he was their answer. He turned back, his gaze steady, and delivered his final command, a testament that was both a eulogy and a genesis. The song ends with me, he said, the words simple and devastating. Make sure everyone hears it. The connection closed. There were no more words to be said. The message was not just for Valeris, it was for all of humanity. The story of the chorus would not end in silence. It would end in a chord of salvation so pure it would reset a galaxy, and it was his voice, his sacrifice, that would give it sound. He turned his full attention to the controls, guiding the shuddering, disintegrating Odysseus deeper into the swirling grey heart of the beast, a lone musician walking onto the stage for the performance of a lifetime. The overload sequence was a countdown to his own dissolution, a final mechanical sigh from the ship that had been his home and was now to be his pyre. Aris's finger hovered over the final command trigger, the rhythmic pulse of the light in his veins seeming to slow, aligning with the calm, terrible certainty in his heart. There was no grand explosion, no cataclysmic fireball tearing through the silent swarm. Instead, the dying heart of the Odysseus performed one last, magnificent act of transfiguration. The warp core, pushed far beyond any design tolerance, did not rupture. It resonated. A wave of energy erupted from the ship, but it was unlike anything ever recorded in the annals of human physics. It was not a destructive force, but a coherent, breathtakingly beautiful symphony of light and structured sound given physical form. It expanded in a perfect, shimmering sphere, silent in the vacuum, yet singing a song of pure, corrective harmony that Aris could feel in his soul. It was the chorus's last gift, their final, perfected command, broadcast through the lens of his own sacrificed humanity. The wave washed over the Devourer, and the silent, churning grey hellscape reacted not with violence, but with a sudden, profound stillness. The nanites, moments ago a mindless storm of consumption, simply stopped. The wave of resonant frequency didn't destroy them. It reprogrammed them, overwriting billions of years of corrupted evolution with the original, pristine instructions in a single, glorious instant. The grey goo began to shimmer, each individual nanite flashing like a microscopic star as the incorrect coding was purged. Then, as the harmonic wave continued its expansion, a miraculous transformation swept across the swarm. The particles began to crystallize, locking into perfect, intricate geometric patterns, their mindless hunger replaced by a stable, beautiful inertness. For a single, breathtaking moment, the entire terrifying expanse of the Devourer glittered like a galaxy of frozen diamonds, a silent, monumental memorial to a catastrophe averted. And then, as the resonant energy peaked and faded, the crystalline structures lost their cohesion, dissolving not into dust, but into a harmless, glittering mist that scattered into the void, leaving only the clean, untainted blackness of space behind. The silence that followed was no longer one of impending doom, but of peace, a debt paid in full. From the bridge of the Harbinger, Commander Valeris could only watch, her hands gripping the edge of the command console until her knuckles turned white. The silent, churning gray expanse that had blotted out the stars began to shimmer, a wave of impossible light radiating from its center and washing over the swarm, turning the mindless Devourer into a glittering, frozen tapestry of crystalline patterns. It hung there for a breathtaking moment, a galaxy-sized monument to sacrifice, before dissolving into a harmless, sparkling mist that scattered on solar winds she could not feel. The threat was simply gone, erased, and in the void it left behind there was nothing, no wreckage, no debris, no sign of the Odysseus or the man who had flown it into the heart of oblivion. As the last of the glittering dust faded, a profound and unexpected emptiness opened within her, the faint, background hum of the archive's presence in her mind, a connection she had barely acknowledged until this very moment began to recede. It was like a song she'd grown accustomed to hearing from a distant room suddenly falling silent, leaving a stillness that felt deeper and more absolute than any quiet she had ever known. The shared sorrow, the ancient knowledge, the ghostly melody, it all faded, not with a bang but a whisper, its purpose fulfilled. She was alone in her own skull again, and the silence there was deafening. Just as the last echo of the chorus vanished, a final impression pierced the quiet, not a voice, not a sound, but a pure, clear psychic image that bloomed behind her eyes with the clarity of a remembered dream. It was Aris, not as she had last seen him, his face strained with the agony of transformation, but as he must have been in his final, transcendent moment. He was smiling, an expression of such profound and utter peace that it carried no trace of regret or fear, only a quiet, completed joy, as if he had finally found the answer to a question he had been asking his entire life. The image held for a single, perfect heartbeat, a final gift from a connection that was already broken, and then it too winked out, leaving behind only the cold, impersonal starfield on the viewscreen and the memory of a smile hanging in the air like stardust. He was gone, his ship was gone, the enemy was gone. All that remained was the testimony of the clean, silent blackness and the monumental, heartbreaking victory of a single man who had chosen to become the solution. The silence that followed the Devourer's dissolution was a weight Commander Valeris carried all the way back to Central Command, a profound quiet that had settled deep within her own mind now that the chorus's presence was gone. The debriefing room felt sterile and unnervingly small, the faces of the High Command arrayed before her like a tribunal of stone. They expected a report on a contained biohazard, a catalogue of protocol breaches and tactical assessments. What Valeris delivered was a truth so vast it threatened the foundations of their entire understanding of humanity's place in the cosmos. She did not stand at a podium, she stood as a witness. Her testimony was not a military summary but a narrative, a story woven from shared nightmares and shared sacrifice. She spoke of the archive not as a weapon but as a library of a dead race's soul. She described the Devourer not as a mindless monster but as a tragic error, a ghost of incredible ambition that had turned on its creators. And she told them of Aris Thorne not as a rogue agent lost to an alien contagion, but as a man who had willingly unraveled his own consciousness to become the key that fit a lock no one else could see. She presented the raw, unedited data from the Harbinger's logs, the sensor readings of the crystalline transformation, and the final, clean transmission from the Odysseus's core. The room, once filled with skeptical tension, fell into a hushed, stunned silence. The scale of the threat they had narrowly avoided, and the breathtaking cost of its aversion, was undeniable. At the conclusion of her report, Valeris placed a single date slate on the table before the assembled admirals and generals. The archive's knowledge and Aris Thorne's sacrifice left us with one final artifact, she said, her voice clear and steady despite the emotion welling in her throat. It is not a blueprint for a new weapon, it is not a shield. she initiated the file. A complex, beautiful waveform filled the main display, a visual representation of a sound that was both an equation and a song. This is the resonant frequency, the corrective harmonic. As the audio played, a soft, crystalline tone filled the room, a melody that felt both alien and deeply familiar, a chord that seemed to vibrate at a frequency that touched something primal within them. It was the sound of peace, the sound of a reset button for doomsday. Valeris looked at each of the stunned faces in turn, her final words hanging in the air with the last echoes of the tone. This is not a weapon, it is a lullaby, a gift from two species to ensure the silence never consumes us again. In the decades that followed, that lullaby became a constant, quiet hum on the edge of humanity's perception. Broadcast on a secure, endless loop from a network of hidden relays at the fringe of explored space, the harmonic frequency wove itself into the background of daily life, a subtle undercurrent in the planet's electromagnetic symphony. At first, there were no obvious effects, no grand pronouncements. The change revealed itself not in laboratories or government reports, but in the quiet hours of the night, in the dreams of a new generation. Children born into this new, protected world began to report dreams of breathtaking clarity and wonder. They did not dream of monsters under the bed or abstract fears. They dreamt of swirling nebulae in impossible colors of violet and gold. They dreamt of vast, crystalline cities singing silent songs under alien suns. And they dreamt of a quiet, sad-eyed man who stood at the edge of starlight, a bridge between what was and what could be. These new dreamers, as they came to be known, exhibited a subtle but profound neurological shift. Standardized tests began to show marked increases in spatial reasoning, pattern recognition, and an intuitive grasp of complex mathematical concepts. But more importantly, they displayed an innate, empathetic connection to the idea of the cosmos, not as a void to be conquered, but as a community waiting to be joined. Their minds, gently shaped by the lullaby of a saved world, were open, curious, and unafraid. They are the living legacy of Aris Thorne and the civilization he saved, their minds tuned to a frequency of connection rather than fear. They look up at the stars not with trepidation, but with a patient, knowing anticipation, their imaginations sparking with the unshakable feeling that they are not alone, and that the next message from the cosmos is not something to be feared, but something to be welcomed. The final shot of the galaxy holds no monuments, no grand structures bearing his name. The silence is no longer a threat, but a profound and peaceful quiet, a blank slate upon which new stories can now be written. Woven into the very fabric of this new reality, embedded within the background radiation that whispers the universe's oldest secrets, is the faint, enduring echo of the alien lullaby. It is a constant, gentle reminder, a cosmic safeguard humming just below the threshold of hearing, a promise etched into the laws of physics itself that the Devourer's hunger will never wake again. This is the true legacy, not carved in stone, but sung into the void, a permanent part of existence. On Earth, at the ceremony marking the end of the quiet, unspoken war, Commander Valeris stands before the gathered leaders of a world that will never truly know what it was saved from. Her voice, once used for commands and warnings, is now soft with a reverence earned in the crucible of impossible choices. She speaks not of tactics or victories, but of a man who stared into the heart of an alien nightmare and saw not a weapon but a key. Her words are not just for the dignitaries, they are for the ages, a final transmission to the future. He gave his mind to the alien dream, she says, her gaze lifting from the crowd to the sky beyond, so that we could all wake up to a safer dawn. The phrase hangs in the air, a perfect summary of the paradoxical truth at the heart of this incredible story. The infection that rewrote Aris Thorne's very biology was never a disease to be cured. It was the antidote itself, a carefully designed program to build the one instrument capable of healing a wound in the cosmos. The terrifying visions, the haunting melody, the luminous mark that spread across his skin. These were not symptoms of an illness, but the tools of a miraculous, terrible surgery performed on reality itself. He was not a victim, he was a volunteer, the sole recipient of a cure so vast it required the complete dissolution of the self to administer it. And in that final, transcendent act of fusion with the archive, the dreamer truly did become the dream. Aris Thorne ceased to be a single man and became something eternal, his consciousness woven into the living memory of a civilization he saved, his sacrifice forever a part of the lullaby that now guards all of creation. He is the peaceful dawn he made possible, the safety in the silence, the hope in the hearts of the new dreamers who look to the stars and feel only connection. He is no longer a person in the past tense, but a permanent present tense force, a man who became a myth, who became a melody, who became the very dream of a better, safer universe for all.